I froze when I saw her arrive with another man at the company's couples meeting. I felt the sweat freeze on the back of my neck and my heart race as if it were trying to escape from my chest. Each step she took toward the room echoed like hammer blows in my ears, while I struggled to make sense of what my eyes saw. I still remember the soft music playing in the background, contrasting with the chaos that was taking place inside me. Each muffled laugh from my colleagues sounded like mockery. The decorative lights flashed in my face like accusatory headlights. For a moment, I thought it was all just a nightmare. But reality hit me hard when I approached her and asked in a firm but trembling voice, "Why did you arrive with another man?" Her silence was deafening, a silence that said everything I needed to hear and that, paradoxically, destroyed any hope of an innocent explanation. As she lowered her eyes, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. There was no more room for us in that room. There was nothing left to hold me. There beyond the pain that pulsed with each beat of my heart, so I turned and left, the sound of my footsteps echoing like gunshots in my mind. I returned home in a state of shock. I sat on the couch staring into the void, reliving every detail of the last few years, remembering the first kiss, the plans for the future, the promises that seemed eternal but now were nothing more than echoes of a well-told lie. With each memory, a knife stuck itself deeper into my chest, and even so, for days I remained there, waiting for a call, a message, something that could mend what was broken, but all I received was absolute silence, the same silence that answered me on that cursed night. As the days turned into weeks, I decided that life needed to go on. I got up, organized my things, and started to fill my time with work and short trips. I met new people, some of whom even tried to fill the void left behind, but none of them could come close to healing the wound that throbbed in my chest. In every face I saw, I looked for something that would make me forget, but I always ended up returning home alone. Until, on one of those returns, I found a box in front of my door, an old box, with marks of dust and small scratches, but which carried with it the weight of years of history. I opened it and saw photos, handwritten letters, small objects that held secrets of happy moments, all reminding me of the love that I once thought was true. I felt my hands tremble, my eyes fill with tears, but, above all, I realized that it was nothing more than a silent goodbye, the silent confession of someone who only realized the value of what they had when there was no longer any chance of getting it back. I remember one of the letters, in handwriting I would recognize anywhere, saying, "I am so sorry, more than I can express, and I know that what I did is unforgivable, but I need you to know that it was always you, it was always your smile that made me want to live," and as I read it, my eyes ran over each word as if they could find some healing in them, but each sentence was like salt in an open wound, because there was no more room for her in my life, not after everything the pain had transformed into something deeper, into a certainty that trust, once broken, could not be restored with pretty words or memories of what once was, and as I read that last sentence, I felt a cycle closing. I realized that the only person who needed me now was myself, and that the love that once saved me, now needed to be redirected to me. In the following days, I discovered that she was alone, that the man she had exchanged me for had left her for another, younger woman, more willing to live adventures, and that now she wandered through the same places where we were once happy, hoping to find somewhere the ghost of the man who truly loved her, but the man she was looking for no longer exists, because that man was reborn from the ashes of betrayal as someone who learned to value himself above all else, someone who understood that self-love cannot be negotiated, not even out of the desperate desire to save a failed relationship. With each chance encounter I had with acquaintances, I discovered fragments of what was left of her, comments about how haggard she seemed, about how she had aged in weeks, about how deeply she regretted it, and, in silence, I absorbed it all like someone watching from afar the fall of a castle that he helped build but that no longer belongs to him. I felt sorry, but I also felt relief, because the freedom I gained the day she betrayed me was the same one that allowed me to rebuild my life without carrying the weight of her choices, and with that freedom, I began to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist, and where my decisions would no longer be made out of fear of losing someone who didn't deserve to be by my side. The cold nights that once tortured me with memories began to be filled with the peace of someone who finally understood that love should not be begged for, that respect should not be begged for, and that those who love do not betray. I began to travel to places I dreamed of visiting, to smile without worrying if anyone would think it was strange, to sleep without fear of the phone ringing in the middle of the night bringing lies disguised as apologies, and, with each step I took, I felt as if the weight was lifted from my shoulders, until, on an afternoon with an orange sky, I met someone who looked me in the eyes and said, "I admire who you are, not who you could be for me," and at that moment, I understood that true love is born when we find someone who accepts us with all our scars, but does not want to hurt us even more. Meanwhile, she remained trapped in a cycle of regret, remembering every laugh we shared, every dream we built together, but that she herself destroyed by making the choice to follow momentary desire instead of lasting love. I learned from mutual friends that she approached them looking for clues about my life, that she asked if I was happy, if there was someone by my side, if I still thought about her, but each answer she received made her sink deeper into the guilt that consumed her night after night, because the truth was too painful to bear. The man who once begged for her love, was now the man who moved on without looking back. Among the letters I found in the box, there was one that said, "If one day we meet again, I promise I'll tell you everything looking into your eyes, but fate has cruel ways of teaching lessons, because the reunion never happened, and maybe it never will, because every time she thinks about looking for me, she remembers the silence that enveloped her when she asked herself if there was still a chance for us to be happy, and the answer, echoing in the solitude of her empty room, is the same one I gave her with my silence when I turned my back that night. No, there is no more chance, not after everything that was broken. Somewhere inside me, all that remains is the memory of who I was while I was with her, but the man I am today no longer wishes to return to what died the day she arrived accompanied by another man, because I learned that love should not be a prison, that no one deserves to live chained to the uncertainty of being betrayed again, and that happiness begins when we leave the past where it belongs, freeing ourselves from the chains of illusion that made us believe that true love is putting up with lies, and it was in this understanding that I found the peace I always sought. But what would she do if one day she discovered that that box, with all the letters and memories she left behind, still exists stored among my things, like a silent reliquary of everything we lived and everything we lost? Would you, upon knowing this, have the courage to look for me to rescue what can never be returned? Welcome to our channel. We never support any form of cheating here. Our stories are completely fictional and serve only to show how infidelity destroys lives and leaves deep scars. Get ready to dive into a shocking, intense, and twisty story. Sit back, take a deep breath and enjoy the story. In the heart of a big, busy city, where the days seemed to drag on amidst honking horns and the smell of fresh coffee on the street corners, lived a couple that many admired. Thomas, a 38-year-old man, had the serenity of someone who had always been determined on his face, brown eyes that conveyed confidence and a smile that could calm even the most agitated of hearts. He was a manager at an insurance company and his routine was marked by discipline, attention to every detail and kindness to everyone around him. Laura, 35, had long, black hair that swayed like silk when she walked, her gaze was magnetic, capable of lighting up a room, and her soft voice won over anyone who spoke to her. Laura worked as an event coordinator and, unlike Thomas, her life was guided by creativity and the constant desire to surprise, two distinct worlds that, for years, complemented each other almost perfectly. They met at a corporate event, when Thomas was invited to a lecture on leadership and, upon arriving at the hall decorated with flowers and soft lights, he found Laura organizing every detail with a passion he had never seen before. She was smiling as she lined up napkins on the tables and talked to suppliers on the phone, and he, between one conversation and another, found himself looking at her, admiring the way she managed everything without losing her lightness. When they finally bumped into each other next to a pile of crystal glasses, he offered to help her balance a heavy box and, between laughter and exchange of glances, they discovered that they had much more in common than they imagined. From there, a bond was born that grew with the naturalness of someone who finds their match in the right place and at the right time. Their first weeks together were marked by aimless walks around the city, afternoons in hidden cafes where they talked about dreams, fears, and plans for the future, and nights when they exchanged confidences until the sun began to rise. Thomas found in Laura a spark that rekindled his monotonous days, while Laura saw in Thomas the stability and security she had always dreamed of to build a home. It wasn't long before they rented an apartment on the 8th floor of an old building, with large windows that let the sunset invade every corner of the room, and there they created a refuge full of plants, books, vinyl records and paintings bought on short trips they took to escape the routine. Their relationship was built on small, daily gestures. Thomas would leave for work early and always leave a sweet note next to the coffee maker. Laura would make surprise dinners when she knew he was exhausted, and on Sundays, even when there were no plans, they would spend the morning in bed cuddling, as if the whole world could wait until they were ready to face it. Those moments reinforced the certainty that they had made the right choice, that their love was strong enough to weather any storm. Among friends and family, they were seen as an exemplary couple. The chemistry between them was noticeable in every touch, every look, and everyone commented on how they seemed made for each other. Thomas's mother said she had never seen him so happy, that his expression had changed since Lara came into his life, while Lara's colleagues said she had become more confident and calm, as if she had found the balance she had been searching for. At family gatherings, they sat side by side, exchanging whispers and laughter, and at end-of-year parties, they made plans for the coming years, talking about trips, children, a bigger house, maybe even opening a business together. Behind this charming scenario, there were also the day-to-day difficulties that every couple faces, small arguments about who left the light on, delays that irritated one or the other, moments of jealousy when some situation aroused insecurity, but so far nothing that shook the foundations of the relationship. They had learned to talk, to apologize, to give in when necessary, and each reconciliation brought them closer together, showing that love was not only made up of happy moments, but also of the ability to face challenges together. Lara's career, however, was demanding more and more of her, with bigger events, more demanding clients, and schedules that made her arrive home late, while Thomas found himself stuck in the repetitive routine of the office, counting the minutes until she would return. He waited for her anxiously, preparing her favorite meal, arranging the sofa so they could watch series in each other's arms, but often, she would arrive too tired for anything other than a quick shower and a brief kiss goodnight. This imbalance began to make him restless, but he always reminded himself that it was just a phase, that all the effort would be rewarded, because he trusted her and the love they had built. Lara, on the other hand, felt torn between her passion for work and her desire to be more present. There were days when, on her way home, her heart sank for having missed yet another night with Thomas. She remembered his face when he said he missed her and promised himself that he would leave early the next day. Sometimes, she would send sweet messages in the middle of the workday, just to remind him that he was important, and he would respond with photos of the dinner that awaited her or a movie he had chosen for them to watch together. Small efforts that kept the flame alive, but that, little by little, began to be lost amidst the demands and external pressures. The apartment that once seemed like a refuge became too silent, the plants began to wilt from lack of care, the records became dusty and conversations became scarcer. Still, there were times when the harmony returned, when a simple look rekindled the complicity, and these moments were enough to make both believe that the love that had united them was still there, just dormant, waiting to be awakened by simple and sincere gestures. On the weekends when they were able to dedicate time to each other, they laughed like teenagers, cooked together, danced barefoot around the living room to the sound of old songs, remembering the days when everything seemed perfect. Her friends began to notice that Lara was tired, that she looked lost in her eyes during some meetings, and that she had difficulty balancing her professional commitments with her personal life. However, whenever anyone asked her, she would say that everything was fine, that she was just going through an intense period at work. Thomas, on the other hand, remained optimistic, telling his colleagues that everything would soon go back to normal, that Lara was his best friend, his love, and that nothing could separate them, because they had built something real. He still looked at her as he had on the first day, he still saw in her the woman of his dreams, and even when the routine threatened to extinguish the sparkle of their relationship, he made sure to rekindle the flame with small details. The trips they loved so much became rarer, but whenever they managed to find a few days off, they chose special destinations, places that held meaning for both of them. In those moments, it was as if time was going backwards, as if nothing could shake the joy of being together. They returned home refreshed, full of plans, but as soon as the routine started again, the distances would grow again, and the silences would become longer than any conversation. Still, they both insisted on believing that love would win, that all it took was a little more effort, a little more patience. Despite everything, there was respect, affection, and a constant reminder of the reason that brought them together. They were proud of each other, supported each other in their professional achievements, celebrated each victory with tight hugs and improvised toasts, even though they were often not physically together to celebrate. When they were side by side, a touch was enough to remind them how good it was to have each other, and even on the hardest days, they still exchanged looks that said more than any words. Sunday mornings, although rarer, continued to be sacred when they managed to wake up together, drink coffee on the porch, talk about movies, friends, and make plans for the future. In recent months, however, the stress began to leave invisible marks. Thomas began to work more to keep his mind occupied, while Lara immersed herself in new projects that consumed her entire weekends. Their meetings became shorter and shorter, as if they were just fulfilling an obligation. Still, he admired her for her dedication, and she, even exhausted, was thrilled when she arrived home and found the porch light on, a sign that he was still waiting for her. Amidst all the commitments and responsibilities, there remained the feeling that the love they had built was strong enough to withstand any phase, that everything would pass, and that they would soon be able to laugh about their difficulties again, as they always had. However, beneath the calm surface that they both struggled to maintain, there was a growing discomfort, a silence that was slowly taking over the home, conversations interrupted by work notifications, messages that needed an immediate response, and thoughts that no longer met as before. But no one could have imagined that, while Thomas remained firm in his love and Lara lost herself amid the pressures of her career, invisible forces were at work, preparing the ground for something that would change the course of their lives forever, something that would test everything they had built together and that would make each gesture, each choice, have a weight that they could never have imagined. The days began to drag on as if time was playing a cruel trick on Thomas. He woke up early and made coffee as usual, but Lara's chair was empty more and more often. She left before sunrise or arrived so late that they didn't even exchange more than 2 words. The apartment, which had once been a home full of laughter, became silent and gloomy, with the echo of Thomas's footsteps echoing through the hallways and the scent of Lara's perfume hanging in the air as a constant reminder of how far away she was even though she was so close. He tried to keep the routine they had created together alive. He took care of the plants, prepared dinner, and made the bed with care, but every detail seemed like a futile effort, as if he were setting a stage for a show that would never happen again. The flame of optimism, which had always been his strength, began to waver, but he insisted on believing that everything would work out, that the clouds hanging over them would soon dissipate, because he loved Lara more than he could explain. While Thomas clung to every little sign that they could get back to what they had, Lara lived at a different pace, her nights stretching out into dinners with clients, improvised lunches between meetings, phone calls that filled every break in the day, and messages that needed immediate responses. She felt the weight of expectations on her shoulders, the pressure to maintain an impeccable professional image, the need to always be the best, the most creative, the most dedicated, until she began to confuse what she did out of passion with what she did just to meet external demands. On the days when she managed to get home before midnight, she would look at Thomas sleeping on the couch, holding the remote control with a movie paused on the screen, and she would feel guilty, but instead of waking him up and talking, she would take a shower in silence, lie down next to him, and pretend that everything was fine, promising herself that the next day she would do things differently. But tomorrow never brought the change that they both needed. The messages between them became more formal, limited to practical announcements about missing purchases, bills to pay or schedule changes, and the phone calls, increasingly rare, were used only to confirm appointments or warn of delays. Sundays, previously reserved for series marathons and lazy coffees, began to be dominated by Lara, who used the time to plan events, visit suppliers or organize details that required her personal presence. Thomas tried to accompany her a few times, but soon realized that his place there was as a spectator, because Lara seemed to belong to a world that no longer included him, a world of meetings, quick decisions and contacts he didn't even know. The silent nights began to be filled with memories of how it all began. Thomas found himself looking at framed photos that decorated the living room, each one marking a moment of genuine happiness that now seemed so distant. The trips, the birthdays, the special dates celebrated with intensity. Everything that had once served as the basis for their story now became a source of pain, as it exposed the growing distance that they could no longer hide, not even from themselves. The plants he had cared for so much began to wither, as if reflecting the state of their relationship. The leaves turned yellow and fell, and the smell of wet earth that had once brought joy became just another reminder of what was dying between them. Meanwhile, Lara also felt lost. There were nights when, alone in her car after long hours of work, she would rest her head on the steering wheel and cry softly, remembering when Thomas would wait for her at the window, waving with a smile as if he couldn't wait to hug her. But now, even when she returned early, she found only the emptiness and coldness of a home that seemed to no longer recognize her. She began to seek comfort in conversations that would arise by chance, in words of admiration from people who were not part of her story, but who made her feel alive, wanted, understood, and these words became increasingly attractive, filling a void that she could not admit even to herself. In the midst of an event that required weeks of preparation, Lara met someone who seemed to be exactly what she needed at that moment, a man who complimented her frequently, who made her laugh with clever jokes, who showed genuine interest in her ideas and who offered a friendly shoulder when things got out of hand. At first, she told herself that it was just friendship, that she just needed someone who understood her, that there was nothing more to it than professional conversations and occasional laughter, but little by little she realized that she sought his messages, that she longed for his presence, that the smile that had once been reserved for Thomas now appeared spontaneously when she saw that man's name light up on her cell phone screen. Thomas, on the other hand, began to notice small changes that made him uneasy, the smell of a different perfume that he didn't recognize, the way Lara dressed more carefully even when she said she only had regular meetings, the anxiety with which she checked her phone while they were having dinner, the distant looks she gave him when he tried to talk about plans for the future. At times, he convinced himself that it was just a figment of his imagination, that stress could explain it all, but there were days when he couldn't ignore the chill that ran down his spine when she smiled at her cell phone or when she abruptly changed the subject when asked a question. The tension between them grew silently and relentlessly, arguments began to arise over trivial matters, a glass forgotten in the sink, a towel out of place, but behind each harsh word there was an accumulation of frustrations that neither of them could express openly. Lara became increasingly distant, justifying her absences with commitments that seemed to never end, while Thomas began to arrive home later to avoid the awkwardness of silence or the coldness of conversations that ended before they even began. Their home, which had once been a refuge, became a minefield where any word could trigger an explosion of pent-up hurt. Friends began to notice the wear and tear, invitations to couples meetings were being declined, birthdays forgotten, messages unanswered, and when they did appear at a social event, the complicity that had always marked the couple gave way to an uncomfortable formality, glances that did not meet, hugs that seemed more like performances than displays of affection. At one of these meetings, Thomas, upon seeing Lara talking animatedly with a man he did not recognize, felt a pang of jealousy that ate away at him inside, but he swallowed the feeling to avoid a scene, even though everything inside him screamed that something was very wrong. Lara, in turn, was increasingly immersed in the adrenaline of a forbidden relationship that had not yet materialized physically, but that already made her feel alive in a way she had not felt in a long time, the messages exchanged in the early hours of the morning, the quick encounters in cafes far from home, the looks filled with desire and the compliments that fed her ego. She began to make excuses to miss appointments with Thomas, inventing short work trips, extending meetings until late, all to have more time to experience that emotion that mixed fear, guilt and excitement, while her heart beat wildly with each ring of her cell phone. Until the breaking point came unexpectedly, at a couples meeting at the company where Thomas worked, an event planned to integrate families, bring colleagues closer together and strengthen bonds. He arrived early, as always, eager to introduce Lara to his colleagues, proud of the woman he said was his great love, but as the minutes passed and she didn't show up, he began to feel restlessness growing inside him. He checked his cell phone several times, called, sent messages, but got no response. Until, when the room was already full of smiling couples and colleagues commenting on how lucky he was to have someone like her, Thomas saw the door open and, for a moment, his heart filled with relief when he saw her enter. What he didn't expect was to see her arm in arm with another man, smiling like she hadn't smiled at him in months, walking towards the tables as if it were the most natural thing in the world, her laughter echoing like sharp blades cutting every thread of hope that remained in his heart. The gazes of his colleagues, first curious, then embarrassed, turned to Thomas, who remained still, feeling the blood freeze in his veins, his breathing become heavy, his head throbbing, while each step of Lara and the man at her side seemed to slow down time, prolonging the suffering that exploded in his chest. When they finally approached, Thomas took a deep breath, gathered what little dignity he had left, and asked in the firmest voice he could muster, "Why did you arrive accompanied by another man?" The room fell into absolute silence, as if the whole world had stopped to watch that moment. Lara opened her mouth, but no words came out, she just looked away, as if she couldn't bear to face the pain she was causing. Her silence was more eloquent than any explanation, a silent confession that tore Thomas's heart apart and destroyed everything they had built, every happy memory, every plan, every promise exchanged. As the music started playing again in the background, Thomas felt his legs weaken, but he kept his posture, turned and left without looking back, each step echoing like a hammer that hammered home the certainty that nothing could ever be the same again, while Lara remained still, watching the distance between them grow with each second, feeling for the first time the real weight of the choices she had made, without knowing that this would only be the beginning of a sequence of revelations that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. The silence that settled in the hall that night would never be forgotten. The following days passed in a blur for Thomas, who isolated himself from the world, leaving his phone turned off, the windows closed and the lights off as if he wanted to disappear along with the pain that spread through every part of his body. Sleepless nights piled up as he relived every detail of the last few months, fitting together the pieces that once seemed disconnected but now formed the perfect image of betrayal. The cold messages, the unexplained delays, the distant looks. Everything made sense, but nothing hurt as much as the feeling of having been deceived while giving himself completely. He wondered where he had gone wrong, at what point he had stopped being enough, and why he had not been able to see the truth before his heart was shattered in front of everyone. Lara, in turn, felt the weight of every minute that passed since that night, her hands trembled every time she remembered Thomas's gaze, a gaze that mixed disbelief, pain and disappointment. Every corner of the apartment seemed to carry his ghost, the smell of the coffee he prepared, the blanket thrown over the sofa, the old letters that held vows of eternal love, everything had become a cruel reminder of what she had lost. Sleepless nights became routine, she cried until she fell asleep, hugging the pillow, mentally hearing the words that were never said, but that echoed like screams inside her. It was only on the morning of the third day after the devastating encounter that Lara decided to look for Thomas. She needed to explain, she needed to try to undo the destruction she had caused. Even though she knew that nothing could erase what she had done, she felt she needed to tell him the truth she had been hiding for months, the real reason she had pushed him away. But she didn't know if he would listen to her, or if she would have the strength to face the man who had once been the center of her world again. She gathered up her courage and knocked on the apartment door, her heart racing as she heard footsteps approaching from the other side. When the door opened, she found Thomas thinner, with dark circles under his eyes and a look that mixed tiredness and coldness. He remained silent, blocking the entrance with his body, as if his mere presence were a threat. But Lara took a deep breath and asked to come in, saying that she needed to explain everything, that she could no longer bear the secret that consumed her day and night alone. Thomas watched her for a few seconds that seemed like an eternity, then made room and let her pass. Lara entered slowly, smelling the familiar smell of home that now seemed so far away. She looked around and realized that nothing had changed physically, but the heavy atmosphere and the piercing silence showed that everything between them had been irrevocably transformed. They sat on opposite sides of the sofa, he with his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on an undefined point, while she tried to find the strength to begin. The words got stuck in her throat, but finally, through tears, she began to speak. She said that what had happened was not just the result of tiredness or the suffocating routine. She confessed that months before, she had discovered that she would not be able to have children. The diagnosis had come coldly, during a routine appointment where she had expected to hear only good news. But she left the office with an emptiness that she did not know how to fill. She tried to deal with the pain alone, believing that in time she would find the strength to tell Thomas, but every time she saw him talk excitedly about having children, about children's names or about family trips, she felt crushed by guilt and despair. Shame. As she spoke, Lara was shaking, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably, her hands seeking support in the fabric of the sofa, as if it could stop her from falling apart into 1,000 pieces. She said that she started to pull away because she couldn't stand to see the sparkle in Thomas's eyes when he imagined a future they could never have. She confessed that the feeling of failure pushed her to work harder, spend more time away from home, make more excuses to avoid facing reality. Until she met someone who made her feel alive again, someone who didn't talk about children or family, someone who saw her without demands, but who at the same time made her sink into an abyss of regret. Lara knelt before Thomas, held his hands and begged him to look her in the eyes, saying that she never wanted to betray him like that, but that she felt destroyed for not being able to give him what he wanted most. She said that she loved him more than anything, but that she was lost, desperate, and found no other way out than to hide in another reality. Thomas remained silent, but his hands trembled beneath hers, his hardened face began to contort, and when he finally spoke, his voice was low, hoarse, almost unrecognizable. He asked why she didn't trust him, why she believed he would leave her or love her less if he knew the truth. He said that all the love he felt did not depend on children, that he had chosen her for who she was, not for what they could build, and that her greatest crime was not the betrayal itself, but the lack of trust in sharing him with her, because, in all their years together, he had always believed they were a team, and now he found himself alone, betrayed, not only by her body, but by his soul, because while he dreamed of a future together, she isolated herself in secrets and lies. Silence once again dominated the room, broken only by the panting breaths and the muffled sound of Lara's sobs, who begged for a second chance, saying that she would accept any condition, that she would do anything to repair what she had destroyed, but Thomas shook his head, stood up and walked away, saying that he no longer knew who she was, that he could not trust someone who preferred to hide in other people's arms rather than open her heart, while Lara clung to the hem of his shirt, begging him not to leave her. He pulled away carefully but firmly, making it clear that there was no more room for the two of them, that everything they needed to say had been said, and that the love that once united them had died in the silence of the nights in which she chose to lie. The atmosphere in the apartment seemed frozen, as if time had stopped to witness the end of a story that began with so much love. Thomas walked to the door, opened it, and waited for Lara to leave. Her eyes were red, but her posture was unshakable. She hesitated, looked around, remembering the happy moments, the sofa where they slept in each other's arms, the kitchen where they cooked together, the balcony where they planned the future. But all of this now seemed like part of another life. She finally got up, walked past him without being able to look at him, and left, leaving behind not only the man she loved, but all the hope of rebuilding what she had destroyed with her choices. When the door closed, Thomas leaned against it, breathing deeply, his chest rising and falling quickly as if he had run a marathon. He felt the weight of everything he had heard, the revelation that changed not only the present, but the entire meaning of the past. He realized that the love he had was true, but that it could not exist where there was no trust. As silent tears ran down his face, he understood that, despite the pain, he would need to rebuild himself from there, because he deserved a love based on truth, not on lies that corrode even the best intentions. And with that certainty, he knew that the worst was over, but that the consequences of that secret would still be with him for a long time. The rain was falling softly and silently when Thomas left the apartment. He needed to get out of there, feel the cold air hit his face, find something that would remind him that the world still existed beyond the walls that had witnessed the destruction of his dreams. He walked through the streets lit only by streetlights that cast long shadows on the wet asphalt. Each step echoed in his mind like the ticking of a clock marking the end of an era. He entered a cafe that was open late at night, the same one he had frequented with Lara in the first months of their relationship. But now the chairs seemed empty of meaning, the walls covered in aged paintings seemed to mock his pain. He ordered a black coffee, sat at a table in the corner and stared out the window, watching the cars pass by like shadows in the fog, while the words Lara had said earlier repeated themselves like a scratched record in his mind, the broken promises, the love that was lost, the truth that came too late. The barista, noticing Thomas's distant gaze, approached and asked if he needed anything. Thomas just nodded, thanking him for the gesture with a tired smile, but he didn't have the strength to talk. Instead, he kept remembering Lara's touch, the nights she fell asleep in his arms, the mornings they woke up together with the sunlight warming their faces. Everything seemed so distant, as if it belonged to another life. His throat felt tight, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew he needed to find strength within himself, because he could no longer wait for her love to save him, not after everything. As he sipped his coffee, he tried to project a future in which he would be able to smile again, to build something that wasn't based on lies, but each thought seemed too heavy to carry. Hours passed as Thomas stood there, the rain thickening outside, drumming on the glass with a mesmerizing rhythm, until the barista announced that the cafe would be closing soon. Thomas nodded, got up slowly, leaving some notes on the table as payment, and walked out into the storm that was now washing the deserted streets. He walked aimlessly, letting the drops wet his face, hiding the tears that insisted on falling. He didn't know where he was going, but he needed to get away from everything that reminded him of her. He headed towards the park they used to visit on Sundays. Even though he knew that memory still hurt, he felt like he needed to face every memory if he ever wanted to leave her behind. When he arrived, he found the benches empty, the smell of wet earth bringing back forgotten conversations and laughter echoing in his mind like ghosts. As he walked through the soaked trees, he realized he was not alone. A figure appeared in the shadows, holding an umbrella and walking toward him. When the person approached, Thomas felt his heart race, because even without seeing clearly, he recognized the perfume that reached him mixed with the smell of rain. Lara appeared under the dim light of a streetlight, her eyes red, her face pale, her voice failing as she called out to him, begging him to stop, to listen to her one more time. Thomas took a deep breath, tried to maintain his posture, but the sight of her there, so vulnerable, shook his certainties. Even so, he kept his distance, his eyes fixed on her as he asked, in a firm voice, what else could be said, what was left to explain after everything that had been revealed. Lara cried, the umbrella trembled in her hands. She said that since he left her alone in the apartment, she couldn't breathe anymore, that she spent her days reliving every word said, every look exchanged, and that she needed to tell him that, even though she couldn't have children, she always loved him above all else, that every betrayal committed against him was, in fact, a betrayal against herself, because with every touch she received from another man, she was only trying to fill a void that she refused to share with Thomas. She spoke quickly, her words tumbling over each other, as if she feared she wouldn't have enough time to expose everything she was carrying. She said she didn't want justifications, but she needed him to know that her mistake was not trusting him, not in the love they built, but that if she could go back in time, she would have opened her heart and faced together what now separated them. Thomas listened to her in silence, the sound of the rain serving as a soundtrack for a dialogue that sounded like a farewell. When he finally answered, his voice was low, but each word was filled with pain and decision. He said that he would always love her in some way, that no one would erase what they had lived, but that love without trust was not enough, that he could no longer be the man who supported her when, deep down, she did not believe in him. He confessed that he imagined her growing old by his side, that he had dreamed of so many things that would never happen now, and that the betrayal had not only been carnal, but also emotional, because when she decided to seek comfort outside, she destroyed not only the present, but the entire future they had planned. His voice faltered, but he continued. He needed to end it, he needed to bury what was left in order to be reborn. Lara fell to her knees on the wet grass, begging him to forgive her, to give her one last chance, promising that they could adopt a child, that they could start over far away, somewhere else where no one would know what they had been through. But Thomas bent down, held her face in his hands and said, with tears streaming down his cheeks, that sometimes love was not enough to fix what was broken, that forgiving did not mean staying, and that what he needed now was to rebuild himself far away from her, because if he stayed, they would only prolong the suffering. Their eyes met, full of pain and longing, but also of resignation, while a lightning bolt illuminated the park, showing two broken hearts that needed to follow opposite paths. The silence between them was as heavy as the heavy sky above their heads, until Lara stood up, the umbrella falling to the side as she approached and hugged him tightly, their bodies trembling under the rain that continued to fall mercilessly. It was a long, desperate hug, as if they both wanted to keep the feeling of each other's touch in their memory, but at the same time they knew that it was the last time they would have that moment. When they separated, their eyes said more than any words, and, with no more strength to prolong the pain, Lara turned and walked away slowly, her steps heavy, as if every inch of distance was torture. Thomas remained standing, watching her disappear into the fog, feeling his chest burn, but certain that he had made the only possible decision to save himself. The following weeks were spent rebuilding for Thomas, who threw himself into work, went back to caring for the plants that had almost died, donated objects that brought painful memories and redecorated the apartment, transforming it into a space that reflected only his own presence. He began to walk every morning, to run in the park where they had said goodbye, each step serving as therapy. With each deep breath, he felt the weight of the past becoming lighter. Friends approached him, invited him to dinners, short trips, and little by little he began to smile for real again, to feel pleasure in the little things, like the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of rain hitting the window without bringing sadness, the warmth of the sun on a clear day. Lara, on the other hand, entered a spiral of regret that seemed to have no end. Every corner of her house exuded Thomas's presence, his perfume still impregnated in clothes forgotten in the closet. The longing became unbearable to the point that she couldn't work, couldn't eat properly. The deep dark circles under her eyes showed everyone who met her that something terrible had happened. Some tried to comfort her. Others just walked away, because they knew it was too late for any advice, and that the weight she carried was the result of her own choices. On sleepless nights, she wrote letters that she would never send, revisiting old photos while begging herself that it was just a nightmare, but the emptiness that surrounded her with each dawn made it clear that she had lost not only the man she loved, but also the chance to live the life she had always dreamed of. Thomas began to realize that the pain was giving way to a gentle longing, to the good memory of what they had experienced, but without the desire to relive it. He began to frequent new places, meet different people. Among them, he met someone special, someone who was in no hurry, who laughed easily and who, above all, did not demand anything beyond what he could offer. He felt that the wound, previously open and throbbing, was beginning to heal, that the memories of Lara, although still present, no longer brought tears, but rather a precious lesson about love and, mainly, about the value of honesty. He learned that sharing weaknesses is not a sign of weakness, but of courage, and that any relationship based on silence is doomed to die suffocated. One day, while organizing boxes at the back of the closet, he found the box that Lara had left at the door, full of letters and memories. He picked it up carefully, felt his heart tighten, but instead of sinking into grief, he smiled slightly, put it in a bag and left. He drove to an open area of the park, sat on a bench and opened each letter, reading each word as if reading a book he already knew. But in the end, he got up, walked to a trash can and, with a sigh, threw everything away, feeling the cold wind blow on his face as a sign of liberation. For the first time in a long time, he took a deep breath without feeling pain, certain that the future could finally be built without ghosts. As the sun rose timidly on the horizon, Thomas got up, walking slowly back home, feeling his heart light, his mind at peace, and the certainty that true love begins when you learn to love yourself enough to not accept less than you deserve. And as he walked, he thought that, even with everything he had lost, he had gained something even more valuable, the awareness that happiness does not depend on the promises of others, but on the commitment one makes to one's own truth. In the days that followed the moment Thomas left behind the box with all the memories of the relationship, the feeling of liberation he felt in that park turned into a silent force that drove him to reorganize his life. Each morning became a small triumph over the shadows of the past. He woke up lighter, breathed deeper, and realized that the silence of the apartment, once oppressive, now sounded like a blank page ready to be written with new stories. The plants began to bloom again, not only because of the renewed care he dedicated to them, but also because the environment seemed different, more alive, as if the air had been purified of all the pain and sorrow that had accumulated there. Every object he kept now had meaning to him, without needing to remember the bitter moments that had previously contaminated every corner of that home. Sunday mornings once again had a special flavor, when Thomas prepared his coffee while listening to music, sat at the table and read the newspapers, smiling at curious little news items, rediscovering pleasures that depended on no one but himself. He learned to walk slowly through the streets, to observe details that had previously gone unnoticed, such as the singing of birds in parks, the soft scent of flowers in public flowerbeds, or the sunset light dyeing the buildings in golden tones, simple sensations that had previously seemed insignificant, but which now gained importance in his healing process. At the same time, Lara sank deeper and deeper into the spiral of regret that consumed every second of her days. After her last conversation with Thomas, she began to live according to an automatic routine. She would get up to work, but she couldn't stay focused. She would call friends in the hope of hearing a word that would ease her guilt, but few still had the patience or courage to comfort her, because they knew that no words would change the past. The glow that once emanated from her eyes had faded, her easy laughter turned into heavy sighs, and her nights became endless sessions of contained crying, suffocated by the fear of admitting that she had destroyed what she loved most. She began to avoid places she frequented with Thomas, because every corner brought painful memories, every café hid ghosts of old conversations, and every path reminded her of the plans that had been buried the same day her choices came to light. Her co-workers began to notice the flaws that appeared in her presentations, the lapses of attention in meetings, the tiredness written on her face, and although some still tried to help her, it was clear that Lara had lost not only control of her love life, but also the passion that made her brilliant in her profession. Each project became a burden, each challenge seemed insurmountable, because Thomas's absence was like a black hole that sucked her energy, her joy, and her purpose. Meanwhile, Thomas continued to advance on his journey of self-knowledge. He sought help from a therapist who helped him organize his emotions, understand that he was not responsible for Lara's wrong choices, and that he deserved to rebuild his life without carrying the guilt of something that was never his fault. He began to write in a notebook every day, transforming words into companions for reflection. He recorded his fears, achievements, desires, and noticed how, little by little, his heart grew stronger. His friends, who were once distant, came back to seek him out, inviting him to simple moments that rekindled in Thomas the joy of being among people who loved him unconditionally or with ulterior motives. He began to accept invitations to visit new places and participate in activities that had previously not sparked his interest, such as cooking classes and small reading groups, where he discovered that there was still room for new friendships, new smiles, and even the possibility of falling in love again. On one of those nights, during a reading meeting in a charming bookstore, Thomas met Sophia, a woman with a sincere look and a welcoming smile, whose presence conveyed calm and awakened in him the desire to share stories. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time in a long time he found himself laughing for real, not in a forced way, but lightly, as if something inside him had freed itself to allow life to surprise him again. The meetings with Sophia became frequent, and with each coffee shared, each walk at dusk, Thomas felt he was rediscovering the meaning of connecting with someone, without fear, without rushing, just allowing time to show him the right path. There were no demands, no comparisons, just the genuine exchange of looks and words that healed still open wounds. Sophia didn't ask questions about his past, but she was always willing to listen when he felt the need to talk, and this brought him the feeling of security that Thomas thought he would never have again. Even so, he carried with him the awareness that he needed to be honest with himself, because he didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past or live hidden behind fears. He promised himself that, this time, he would walk with his head held high, always telling the truth, because he knew that only in this way could he build something solid. As Thomas walked his path towards a new life, Lara faced a moral dilemma that became more unbearable every day. She constantly questioned herself about how someone could allow themselves to destroy the purest love they had ever received. She struggled between the guilt that kept her paralyzed and the need to move on, but unable to find a direction. Each attempt to resume her life seemed to fail, because wherever she looked, she saw Thomas's shadow, not only in memories, but in the conscience that reminded her, every morning, that her current unhappiness was the direct result of her own choices. This realization corroded her, because she understood that she could no longer blame the circumstances, the work or the difficulties she faced. The betrayal, which seemed like an escape when committed, revealed itself to be a prison whose bars she herself built by choosing silence and lies. Their reunion, which Lara secretly desired, seemed increasingly distant, as she had learned from mutual friends that Thomas was different, lighter, that he had started to smile more often again, that he talked about new interests and that he seemed to have found someone who brightened his days. This news struck her like a sharp blade, because, although she wanted him to be happy, she could not accept that he would be happy without her. She imagined scenes of Thomas with another woman, laughing, exchanging caresses, sharing plans, and felt her stomach churn, her mind spinning, as she understood, in a brutal way, that she had been replaced in the place that she swore would be hers forever. She began to wonder if she had ever deserved that love or if she had always been just someone incapable of reciprocating the trust she had received, and this doubt accompanied her like a ghost in every gesture of daily life. In the apartment, Thomas felt the changes in a tangible way. He realized that he no longer woke up feeling the weight of longing, that Lara's voice in his thoughts had become just a distant echo, that the good memories no longer hurt, but served as part of a story that had shaped him to be who he was. He accepted that he didn't need to forget the past to move forward, but rather learn from it. And that was how, one afternoon, while organizing books on the shelf, he received a message from Sophia inviting him to visit an art exhibition. He smiled as he read her words, feeling his heart beat with enthusiasm, and, when he looked in the mirror, he saw in his eyes something he thought was lost forever: hope. The dilemma that Thomas faced was whether or not to allow himself to dive head first into a new love, because although he wanted to build a new story, he was afraid of carrying insecurities that could contaminate what was emerging so lightly. He wondered if he was ready to offer the best of himself to another person or if he still needed time to heal wounds that, although closed, could open up in the face of challenges. He knew that he did not want to repeat the silence that had destroyed his previous relationship, but he also did not want to rush into steps that could compromise the trust that was beginning to grow between him and Sophia. This conflict accompanied him in every moment they spent together, but it also helped him realize that the best choices require courage and sincerity, not only with others, but mainly with oneself. Meanwhile, Lara, immersed in regret, decided to seek professional help when she realized that she would not be able to deal with the consequences of her actions alone. She began therapy sessions, where she began to revisit the moments that led her to betrayal, recognizing the patterns of behavior that she had repeated since her youth, facing the pain that she had always preferred to ignore. The therapist confronted her with questions that made her cry, but also helped her find answers that, for the first time, seemed to bring some sense to the internal chaos that consumed her. She understood that her tendency to avoid difficult conversations, her fear of disappointing, and her inability to share her weaknesses were the true causes of the destruction of her relationship. This awareness, although painful, also represented a ray of hope that she could, one day, become a better person. As the weeks went by, Thomas and Sophia intensified their relationship. They started cooking together, they explored new cafes, they walked through old streets talking about everything and nothing, building intimacy in every detail, but there were still days when Thomas withdrew into himself, preferring the silence of home, moments that Sophia respected with affection, showing that she understood his pauses as part of the process. Not as rejection. This understanding made Thomas admire her even more, realizing that he had found someone capable of walking by his side without rushing, without impositions, only with the mutual desire to build something true. It was in this context that Thomas began to feel that, despite everything, it was still possible to believe in love, but that, to live fully, he would need to face his fears and accept that starting over requires, first of all, opening his heart again. With each morning that dawned, Thomas realized that the weight on his chest became less suffocating, the sun that came through the cracks in the window seemed brighter, warming his heart in a way he hadn't experienced in a long time. The routine, previously marked by memories that made him waver, began to be filled with new habits that anchored him in the present, like the habit of going for a walk before work, stopping at small bakeries to have coffee, watching people start their day, letting himself be infected by the energy of the city that was waking up. On one of those mornings, when the cold wind still brought traces of winter, he found Sophia waiting for him on a corner near his building, smiling with her face slightly flushed by the breeze. The sight of her there, so serene, made Thomas feel a wave of gratitude for everything that life, despite the pain, was still capable of offering. The connection between them grew deeper with each meeting, the night walks became frequent, the long conversations under the starry sky served to reveal fears, hopes and dreams. In one of these moments, sitting on a bench by a peaceful lake lit only by the moon, Sophia gently held Thomas's hand and said that she admired his courage, that she understood how difficult it was to start over after having your heart broken, but that she would never allow him to carry the guilt of something he did not cause. Her words came as a balm, because, for the first time, Thomas did not feel like he needed to protect himself. He could simply be himself, with his scars and virtues, and this brought a feeling of freedom that he never imagined he would feel again. He looked her in the eyes, his voice low but firm, saying that he was afraid of hurting her because she was still healing, that he didn't want to build something new on the ruins of an unresolved past, but Sophia just smiled and replied that love was also about having patience, that his heart didn't need to be whole for them to start something real, because they were there to put each piece back together carefully. In this process of rediscovering himself, Thomas resumed old hobbies that he had left aside. He went back to taking photographs, capturing details of the city, anonymous faces that expressed genuine emotions, textures and colors that had previously gone unnoticed. Each click represented a step towards his new version. Little by little, he shared this side with Sophia, who was enchanted by the way he saw the world behind the lens. One weekend, they traveled to a small historic town nearby, explored cobblestone streets, craft fairs and hidden restaurants, where they talked for hours without realizing the time passing. In one of these moments, while watching the sunset from the top of a hill, Thomas, on impulse, confessed that, despite his fear, he wanted to try. He wanted to allow himself to love and be loved. He wanted to build something light, without ghosts, and Sophia, moved, hugged him tightly, saying that she would be by his side, that there was no rush, because the important thing was that they both wanted to walk together. Meanwhile, Lara continued her internal battle. Therapy continued to expose her wounds, but also to reveal possibilities for healing that she had never imagined. She began to write letters to herself, as an exercise proposed by her therapist, in which she expressed her regrets, but also recognized that she could not live forever as a slave to the past. These letters, kept in a wooden box in the corner of her room, became records of her maturation process. Each written word helped her organize her feelings, to see more clearly that she needed to learn to forgive herself before expecting to be forgiven by Thomas. In a particularly difficult session, she was confronted with the question that tortured her the most: why was she unable to share her weaknesses with the person she trusted the most? Lara cried like never before, but left that conversation determined to change, to rebuild her life, even if she would never recover the love she lost. During this period, Lara tried to recapture the small pleasures that used to make her happy. She started practicing yoga again, started cooking simple meals just for herself, rediscovered the pleasure of reading books that had been forgotten on the shelf for years, and in those moments, she felt flashes of serenity, as if life was showing her that it was possible to find balance even in solitude. She began volunteering at an institution that cared for vulnerable children. By helping, she felt useful, part of something greater than her own pain. Little by little, she realized that the world would not stop to wait for her to get back on her feet. She needed to act, break out of the cycle of regret and find a new meaning for her existence, even if that meant accepting that her happiness would never again be linked to Thomas's love. While Lara walked this lonely path, Thomas and Sophia experienced increasingly meaningful moments. One autumn night, they decided to cook together in their apartment, trying out recipes that neither of them had mastered, laughing at their mistakes and delighting in their successes. The atmosphere was filled with aromas, laughter and complicity. When they sat down to dinner, Thomas took Sophia's hand across the table and said that he didn't know what the future held, but that he felt happier than he had ever felt in a long time. Sophia, moved, replied that she didn't need promises, just the present they shared, because each moment together was already a gift in itself. That night, lying on the couch, watching an old movie, Thomas realized that, although the marks of his past were there, they no longer dictated the pace of his life. In this scenario of starting over, an unexpected opportunity arose that led Thomas to face yet another test of his personal growth. He received the news that he would have to travel for work to the city where he met Lara, a short trip, just a few days, but which reopened scars that he thought had completely healed. He talked to Sophia about his fear of revisiting places that held painful memories. He was afraid that the longing would resurface like an overwhelming wave, but she encouraged him, saying that it was not by running away that he would find peace, but by facing each piece of the past with courage. Thomas accepted the challenge and left, promising himself that no matter what he felt, he would use that experience to prove that he was no longer a hostage to the history that hurt him. Once there, he walked down streets that seemed smaller than he remembered, visited restaurants that had once been the scene of happy moments, went into a bookstore where he bought gifts for Lara, and, instead of feeling overwhelmed by memories, he realized that memories were only part of who he had been, not who he was now. One afternoon, he decided to go to the park where they had their first picnic, sat on a bench, closed his eyes and breathed deeply, feeling the smell of autumn, listening to the sound of leaves being carried by the wind, and, in that moment, he understood that he was finally at peace with his story, that the love he felt did not need to be forgotten, but could be remembered with gratitude for everything it taught him about himself. On the last day of the trip, before returning, he found a letter left at the hotel reception. He immediately recognized the handwriting. It was from Lara, who had learned of his presence in the city through acquaintances. In the letter, she said that she did not expect to meet him, but needed to tell him that she loved him, even though she knew it was late, that she had learned a lot since their last goodbye, that she did not want to go back to what they had lost, but wanted to thank him for everything he had been in her life. Her words, although full of longing, no longer brought guilt or despair, only sincerity. Thomas read each line calmly, felt a warmth in his chest, but knew, with certainty, that that chapter was closed, that there was no room to reopen doors that needed to remain closed. Returning home, he was greeted by Sophia with a tight hug and a smile that lit up any darkness. When he told her about the trip, he spoke calmly, without crying, only with the clarity of someone who accepted the past as part of the journey. She listened to him attentively, caressing his hands, showing that she understood him. When he finished, Sophia said that she was proud of him, that few would have the courage to revisit their pain and still come back stronger. That night, between glasses of wine and low laughter, Thomas realized that he had not only survived the greatest of his pains, but that he was ready to write new chapters, without fear, with an open and light heart. This new phase brought Thomas a feeling of freedom he had never imagined. He began to enjoy planning the future, dreaming about trips, personal projects, and moments with Sophia. At the same time, however, he carried with him the lesson he had learned from every tear he shed. He knew that life is made of choices and that the courage to face the consequences defines who we are. Trust is as fragile as crystal and that, when broken, even if rebuilt, it always leaves scars. However, he also understood that these scars did not make him less worthy of loving or being loved, but rather more human, capable of recognizing his own vulnerability and that of others. Autumn was advancing with its afternoons of golden light when Thomas and Sophia decided to rent a small house in a village surrounded by ancient trees, where the sound of falling leaves and the singing of birds made each dawn a promise of peace. There, they found the perfect space to strengthen what they had built together, far from the noise of everything that had once hurt them. They decorated each room with objects that told their story, photographs of short trips, memories of walks, books read together, and flowers that brought bright colors to the rooms. Each detail reinforced the feeling that this house was not just a shelter, but the materialization of a mutual choice to walk side by side, day after day. The conversations continued to be deep, the silences became comfortable, and the future, which had previously frightened Thomas, now seemed just a road that they both wanted to walk calmly, sharing discoveries, supporting each other in the difficulties and celebrating each achievement. There was love in the small gestures, in the coffee that Sophia prepared every morning, in the massages that Thomas gave after a tiring day, in the looks that they exchanged when words became unnecessary. In that space of complicity, trust flourished naturally, as if the past had only served to teach the value of honesty and respect. At the same time, Lara, after months of reflection and intense therapy, made the difficult decision to move to another country. She was looking for a fresh start that wasn't tainted by the memories of what she had lost. She chose a coastal city, where the horizon of the sea reminded her daily that there was always room for new beginnings. She still carried the pain of missing someone, but she began to use this pain as fuel to reinvent herself. She found work at a small publishing house, where her organizational skills and creativity were recognized. She made new friends with people who knew nothing about her story, which allowed her to show only the version of herself that she wanted to build from then on, far from the places that tied her to the past. Lara realized that there was still joy to be discovered, even if it was different from what she had once dreamed of. She learned to value her own company, to find comfort in herself, to understand that no other person could fill the void that arises when we are unable to love who we are. This understanding was liberating, but not without tears, because each victory was accompanied by memories that insisted on hurting. However, when she saw the sea at her side, she realized that she could not find joy in herself. At dawn, she felt the strength of the waves reminding her that everything passes, everything changes, and that the scars on the heart, although they never disappear completely, can become marks of learning. Sophia, who had walked patiently by Thomas's side for months, was now reaping the fruits of her kindness. She felt proud to see him blossom, to realize that the nightly conversations in which she encouraged him had planted seeds of trust, that their shared laughter had erased the shadows of a past that no longer defined them. She herself, who carried her insecurities and wounds from past relationships, found in Thomas someone who listened to her with respect, who did not judge her, but embraced her with the right amount of strength so that she would know that, there, she was safe. Together, they became examples that mature love is built with patience, dialogue and surrender. They learned that love is being willing to face fears as a couple, but also giving space for each one to grow individually, without demands, only with the desire to see the other happy, even if, at some point, their paths separate. One night, during an improvised dinner on the porch of their new home, with candles subtly lighting the wine glasses and the cool breeze bringing the scent of wet earth, Thomas looked into Sophia's eyes and said that he had never imagined that he could love someone again, but that, with her, he had learned that you don't have to forget in order to start over, you just have to accept that life is made up of chapters that sometimes end abruptly, but that this doesn't stop new stories from emerging. That are even more beautiful. Sophia, with tears in her eyes, smiled and replied that she had always known that he was capable of loving again, because in every gesture of his there was generosity, and that, if she had one request to make, it was that they never stop talking, because she knew that silence, more than any cruel word, can destroy even the strongest love. There, between raised glasses and silent promises, they sealed their commitment to keep alive the flame that united them, not only through desire, but through the respect built in each daily choice. In another corner of the world, in her small apartment overlooking the sea, Lara watched the sunset reflected in the waves. She felt her chest tighten, but at the same time, she felt a serenity she had never known before. She had finally understood that loving someone is not enough when you are not capable of being transparent, that the fear of being fragile makes us hide secrets that turn into abysses, and that the courage to share vulnerabilities is what keeps any relationship alive. That afternoon, she wrote in her diary that if she ever met Thomas again, she would not ask him to come back, but only to thank him for having shown her what true love is, and that, despite everything, she would want him to be happy, because only then would she be free to seek her own happiness. Meanwhile, Thomas and Sophia were planning a trip to celebrate 1 year since their first meeting at the bookstore. They wanted to see mountains, hike trails, sleep under the stars, live experiences that, before, seemed like distant dreams, but that were now real because, together, they learned not to be afraid to dream. Each day by Sophia's side reaffirmed the certainty that love doesn't need to be perfect to be true, that it is built with patience, companionship and, above all, with the commitment to never let silence corrode what has been built. This awareness made Thomas realize that, although life had broken him, he had rebuilt himself stronger, wiser, and capable of offering the best of himself to those who deserved to be by his side. The journey of the three characters showed that betrayal does not only destroy relationships, but also the self-esteem, dreams, and worldview of those who get involved in this cycle of lies. It also revealed that pain, when faced with courage, can be transformative, that even the most broken hearts are capable of beating again with joy, and that happiness, although it may seem impossible at times, can always be reborn when honesty and self-love are chosen as the basis for any relationship. Now, looking back, Thomas knew that he would never be the same, but he felt no regret for having loved Lara, because every tear, every sleepless night and every lost hug taught him that true love begins within ourselves, and that when we learn to love ourselves, we find the strength to love others in a purer way. And you, what did you think of this story? We want to know your opinion. Leave in the comments what touched you the most and how you felt following each part of this intense narrative, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this one, where we explore the dramas that can change people's lives forever, but we also show how hope and love can be born even from the most difficult situations. Remember, betrayal destroys families, tears hearts apart and erases dreams. Always choose the path of truth and respect, because only then can you build something worth living. And never forget that this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Our mission is to show how it hurts and takes away the most valuable thing: trust.